Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bucklesberry Lemonade. Tim, what do we have for them today?
You know, Lisa, we've covered a lot of stories that just leave you scratching your head. But today, it's one of those that feels like it's missing the final chapter. It's a true life mystery that starts with a hasty goodbye and ends with, well, who knows?
Right, and we're talking about a family that vanished in the strangest way possible. No distress calls, no dramatic finale, just gone.
This is the story of the Hughes and Floyd family. A story so strange, so dark, and so completely mysterious, it'll make you wonder if you ever really, truly know your neighbors.
Mm, 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 mm. The year is 1996, and we're in Fayetteville, North Carolina. A seemingly normal suburban home on Winter Park Drive is where Robbie Hughes Floyd, her husband Jason, and their four kids live. Robbie is a 32-year-old mother. Her children are 11-year-old Serena, 6-year-old Brandon, and 4-year-old twins Brent and Brittany. Also living with them is Robbie's 17-year-old sister, Jennifer Hughes.
The twins, Brett and Brittany, they had a serious heart condition that required ongoing treatment. That's a detail that just makes this whole story even more unsettling, right?
Yeah, of course.
They needed care. This wasn't a family that could just pack up and go on an extended road trip without having a plan.
And that's exactly what makes what happened next so bizarre. One day in December of 96, a neighbor sees Robbie outside her home. Robbie, now she's acting strangely, kind of rushed, and she's packing boxes into her blue van. The neighbor walks over to talk to her. Robbie explains she's going to Alabama to visit her father, who's sick.
But here's where the first red flag just goes up. Robbie introduces the neighbor to a woman she claims is her mother. But as investigators would later find out, Robbie's real mother hasn't been to her daughter's house in years. So who was that woman? And why the lie?
Exactly. Exactly. And then Robbie, Jennifer, Serena, Brett, and Brittany, they all get into that blue van and drive away. The group that left that day would never be seen again. They left behind Robbie's husband, Jason, and their son, Brandon. A neighbor just assumed they were going on a trip.
What happens next? That's what makes this case so incredibly strange. Jason and Brandon stay in the home a few more months before moving to another part of the state. Jason tells a neighbor that he and Robbie, they're getting a divorce. He even stated that Robbie had called him from Alabama just a few hours after leaving, saying they were at a motel near her father's home and she'd call again in a few days. But according to Jason, he never heard from her again.
But he didn't report them missing?
No, no one did. Not Jason, not her family, nobody. For almost 2 years, the Hughes family said that Robbie was rarely in touch with them anyway, so her silence didn't immediately register as odd. It wasn't until August of 1998 that someone finally filed a missing report. We don't even know who that was supposed to be.
And when the police finally get involved, the story just gets crazier. Robbie's real mother says she hadn't seen her in years, and the woman with Robbie that day definitely wasn't her. And she also told investigators that Robbie had been planning to move her sick father into her North Carolina home, not go to Alabama. It's just conflicting information layered on top of conflicting information.
The investigation turned something else up interesting, and it might explain why Robbie would want to disappear. As it turns out, She was under investigation for welfare fraud, and she vanished right before she was supposed to be questioned.
So the welfare fraud might be the reason for her sudden departure.
Mm-hmm.
But why would she take the kids and her sister? And what about the twins' heart condition? Did she have access to their medication? And if she was just hiding, why would she stop cashing the children's Social Security checks after she left? It's all so messy.
It gets even more confusing. Seems in the year 2000, Lieutenant Jimmy Black of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, well, he said there's no sign of the family, no school records, no Social Security activity. He says, and I'm quoting here, it's as if they don't exist anymore.
Mm, mm. But then, just 4 years later, in '04, a different officer, Sergeant Michael Hohan, says they have reason to believe the family is alive and hiding in Alabama. He even says Robbie's Social Security number showed activity, that she'd written some bad checks, and that Serena's father had been in contact with his daughter.
Right? It's like they're talking about two different cases, though. Sergeant Hohan says one of the ex-husbands has been in contact with his daughter, and she's asking why hasn't he been forwarding her Social Security checks? That sounds like confirmed sighting to me.
And get this, Tim. There were at least 2 confirmed sightings of Jennifer Hughes, the sister, in Fayetteville of '99, back in the same city they left. The last confirmed contact with any of them was in '02, when Serena allegedly called her father.
Then, nothing. The trail just goes cold. No more confirmed sightings. No more Social Security activity since 1999.
Wow.
The case is no longer being actively investigated. Robbie's sister and children, well, they're all adults now. That is, if they're still out there.
So what happened? Did Robbie successfully hide her family away to avoid facing those charges? Did she run into trouble somewhere in rural Alabama and met a sinister end? Or did Jennifer leave them and come back to Fayetteville for a reason? And did the twins get the medical care they needed?
This is a crazy story. It's been everywhere from possible human trafficking all the way down to just what it is, welfare fraud. It's a story with an impossible number of questions and no answers. A family that seems to, well, they just disappeared into thin air. For now, their fate remains one of the most bizarre and perplexing unsolved cases in North Carolina.
Thank you for joining us on Bucklesberry Lemonade. We'll see you next time.
Stay safe, everybody. The wind was cold that morning, the kind that blows salt in your bones and memory into the ocean. In February of 1977, Elizabeth Turvey Brown, or Betty as her family called her, sat behind the wheel of a red, white, and blue Chevy Vega. Her hands were steady, her thoughts a storm of old ghosts and new resolve. At 53, Betty was tired of the drinking, of the sickness, of the silence that had settled into her marriage like mildew on wallpaper. She was headed north, toward Virginia Beach, maybe toward a friend, maybe toward freedom. Her husband, Lee, he was back in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, healing from cancer and haunting their home with alcohol and regret. He wouldn't miss her right away. Lee never did. Betty had vanished before, the storms in her mind pulling her off course. But she always returned, always called. But this time she didn't. She stopped for directions in Kitty Hawk, a town where the wind always seems to whisper secrets, and hearts crack like shells underfoot. No one saw where she went next. Days passed, a week. Then her car was found near the Southern Shores Hotel, parked like it was waiting for her to return. The keys were still in the ignition. Her coat, her hat, her purse, they were all left behind. There was no sign of a struggle, no note, no trace of Betty, not on the sand or in the surf. And Lee didn't report her missing right away. When he finally did, it really wasn't officially to the police, but to his neighbor, who just happened to be a Rocky Mount police sergeant. An unofficial favor, an unofficial search, and an unofficial silence. Betty's family begged for answers, but none came. The Vega was never searched. No dogs, no canvas, just a locked door of bureaucracy and the locked heart of a man who claimed he didn't know where his wife had gone. Some say Lee couldn't have done it. He was too weak, too frail, too tired. Others, well, they say that's exactly why he did it. A man like that doesn't have to lift a finger. He just has to make sure the phone never rings. The questions never got asked. Years passed. Lee moved to Florida, found God, found another wife. But Betty was never found. Not in the sound, not in the woods, not anywhere a living soul might wander. Betty's DNA is now stored in a national database, just waiting for a match, waiting for someone to speak up. And then Kitty Hawk, the wind still blows across the dunes. Sometimes late at night, folks say you can hear the faint click of high heels on the old pier, a coat fluttering in the breeze, and a woman asking for directions to a place she never reached.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bucklesberry Lemonade. Tim, tonight we're heading back to a place we all know and love, but this time it's not for a sweet summer story. It's a winter tale, a truly terrifying one.
You know, Lisa, Boone, North Carolina, it's a beautiful mountain town.
It is.
The kind of place you go to just escape.
Yes.
But this story proves that even in the most idyllic of settings, the strange, the dark, and the mysterious can still find a way in.
And this one is as dark as a mountain night without a moon. On February 3rd, 1972, a family was slaughtered in their home on a hill overlooking that beautiful town. Their deaths were brutal, their motive utterly baffling. and the story of what happened that night has been haunted by questions for over 50 years. The central figure of our story is Bryce Durham, a man who at 51 was living the American dream. He was a veteran car man, a guy who worked his way up in the business for years. And in the summer of 71, he finally got his big break. He brought his own car lot in Boone, a brand new Buick dealership, and moved his family there from Mount Airy.
It was a real fresh start for them, right? A major step up.
Exactly. The dealership was a source of immense pride for Bryce, and it was a familiar place to him, too. He had actually attended Appalachian State University back in the early 40s, so he was a local in his own right. His wife, Virginia, was 44 and worked right there with him at the dealership. And their 18-year-old son, Bobby Joe, he had just been accepted to Appalachian State, a stone's throw away from their new home. It was a family living a good life.
It's a classic American family setting. It makes what happened next just that much more disturbing.
It does, really. But let's not forget the other members of the family. Jenny Durham Hall, Bryce and Virginia's daughter, and her husband Troy Hall. They lived about 4 miles away in a trailer park, close enough to be family, but not close enough to be there that night. The night in question, February 3rd, 1972. It was a terrible night to be on the roads. A normal, snowy afternoon in Boone escalated into a full-blown blizzard, with winds howling up to 40 miles per hour, and snow, well, it was falling so heavily that it was a real struggle to drive.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce had a Rotary meeting that night at a nearby ski resort. A group of Green Berets were in town to give a presentation, and despite the weather, Bryce persevered and went. The meeting wrapped up sometime between 8 and 8:30 p.m.
Well, he had to have been thinking about getting his family home, right? I mean, it's a dangerous night.
He was, and that's where his savvy as a car man comes in. Instead of driving their family car, which he had two-wheel drive, he switched to a brand new four-wheel drive car from the dealership. After all, the family home was at the top of a short but incredibly steep drive, a perfect car for a terrible night. Well, we know they got home around 9 p.m. because several witnesses saw the brand new car ascend that steep drive. Once inside, it seems they settled in for the night. The TV was on. There was food in the living room, and 3 full cups of soda waiting to be finished. The snow was coming down. The wind was howling outside. It was just the perfect night to be cozy and safe at home.
So they're settling in for the night, safe from the storm outside.
And something absolutely horrifying interrupts that quiet moment. According to Troy Hall, the son-in-law, he received a phone call at his home around 10 p.m. The voice on the other end was Virginia Durham, his mother-in-law. Her voice was muffled and difficult to discern, but she managed to get out a terrifying, chilling statement. There are 3 black men here beating up Bryce and Bobby Joe. And then the line went dead.
So she called her son-in-law, not the police.
That's right.
That's already strange.
It is. It is. And remember, this is a time when that kind of claim particularly in a rural, predominantly white community, would have had a very specific impact. But before we get to that, let's follow Troy and Jenny's story. Troy tells his wife about the call, and of course they try to go over, but their car won't start in the blizzard. So they go to their neighbor, Cecil Small, a private investigator, and he agrees to drive them over. Jenny stays in the car while Troy and Cecil cautiously enter the Durham home. The lights are on. The living room is a mess, like it's been ransacked. And the phone, it has been ripped from the wall. They hear the sound of running water, and they follow the sound to the bathroom. And what they see is something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The three bodies, Bryce, Virginia, and Bobby Joe, they are slumped over the lip of the bathtub. Their heads are in the water, their legs on the floor. Their hands, they are bound behind their backs. The water is running, and the tub is full, overflowing. The autopsies would later reveal that Bryce and Bobby Joe's cause of death, they were both strangled and drowned. Virginia was strangled, but she was not drowned. And strangest of all, despite the brutality of the scene, there were no signs of a struggle in the bathroom. No water on the floor, no overturned towels, just nothing.
No struggle at all in the bathroom. That makes it sound like they were led in there. It's almost like they were already incapacitated or something.
It does.
All right.
Or that the bathroom was the final methodical act of an already successful plan. Cecil and Troy ran to a neighbor's house to call the police. The call came in at 10:50 p.m. When police arrived, they confirmed the horrific discovery. The three were dead, and the car Bryce had so carefully chosen, the brand new 4x4, it was abandoned on the side of the road about a mile away. And it was still running. The lights were on, the doors were closed, and a pillowcase filled with some items, mostly silverware, was left inside. A literal bag of money was still in the house. The robbery, it was a flimsy cover story at best.
The initial theory was a robbery gone wrong. Well, that just evaporates at this point. It doesn't make any sense. They left the valuables, they left the car running, and the murderers who so controlled, it just doesn't fit the narrative of a random crime.
And that's where the investigation began to fracture, because the central pieces of evidence were so contradictory. The three men described by Virginia, the stage robbery, the methodical murder, it all pointed to something much more complex.
So what are the theories?
The first theory, and it's a popular one, it was that this was a professional hit. Bryce was a new business owner in a tight-knit community. Perhaps his arrival rubbed someone the wrong way. There were even rumors that he had exposed a scam among other car dealers in the Mount Airy area. But investigators, they dug into this, and while a good motive for a business rival, they never found any solid evidence to connect anyone to the crime. Still, the nature of the killings, the binding of hands, the clean bathroom, the brutal efficiency seems to point to something more than a random act.
It's a very calculated, very personal act of violence. You don't just tie someone up and drown three people unless you're there for a very specific reason or to send a very specific message.
Hmm.
And what about the story of the three men?
That's where the second major theory comes in: a family betrayal. The key to this entire theory rests on whether or not that phone call from Virginia to Troy Hall actually happened.
I see.
The fact that she called her son-in-law first in the midst of a life or death struggle, it's highly unusual. And then there's Troy's timeline. He claimed to have been at the library until just before 10 p.m. Now, but at least one witness had placed him leaving around 8 p.m., leaving a 2-hour gap that perfectly fits the timeline of the murders.
So if the phone call was a lie, it was a very convenient alibi. My mother-in-law called me, so it couldn't have been me.
And if Troy was involved, he would have needed help. He wasn't a professional killer, but the professional nature of the crime and the lack of forensic evidence at the scene, they make it hard to believe he could have pulled it off without help. It's a huge logical leap.
And didn't you say that the Troy's next door neighbor was a private investigator?
I think so.
Ooh.
The police followed all these leads. They investigated Bryce's business dealings. They looked into Troy Hall. And they even pursued the initial claim of the three black men, which created a wave of fear in the community. They even brought in the FBI, but in the end, there was never enough evidence to make an arrest. The fingerprints found at the scene were so contaminated by the sheer volume of police officers that they were rendered useless. The murder weapon was never found, and after a close look, investigators eventually admitted that the robbery was almost certainly staged to throw them off the scent.
Murder weapon, a rope and water.
Of course.
So what happened to the family after all this?
Well, Jenny and her husband, they divorced 4 years later.
Mm.
And the daughter, she has always maintained that her father, mother, and brother were murdered by professional hitmen. She has been very vocal about her belief in this theory and her belief in the phone call from her mother. But without new evidence, the case remains as cold as that February night. The Durham family, Bryce, Virginia, and Bobby Joe, went to their home that night, seeking refuge from the storm. But what they found was a horror that has left a small mountain community with a terrible, unanswerable question. Was it a professional hit ordered by a shady businessman, or was it a dark betrayal within their own family? We may never know.
It's a truly chilling case, and a sobering reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not born from the darkness of a storm, but from the darkness that lives in men.